Mr. Bradshaw at addsometotyourincome.com here to answer the question, how much should I have as a debt to income ratio? What is included in a debt to income ratio? In this, first, we're going to just find some terms. Income, what kinds of income? Debt, what kinds of debt? And ratio, looking at how that comes together itself. I'll get into some examples, and then I've also included what I thought to have just as a completely separate video of defining the difference between gross income and net income, which is often a question of what do we look at for this. At the end, I hope to be able to give you a final calculation, quick way to calculate where you're at when it comes to your debt to income ratio to help you in knowing to make that decision, which is usually tied up with getting a mortgage. So if you are interested in this and you're here, let's dive in to what is included in debt to income ratio. There's a lot here, so let's move forward. Debt, this is important. You often hear people saying good debt versus bad debt. Debt means you owe someone or an organization money. Usually you've set it up to be a monthly payment. It's a certain amount that you are paying. Good debt is often thought of as things that are valuable and can increase in value over time. Bad debt is usually considered things that are decreasing in value over time. Not always the case, but that's a rough ballpark. So if you are buying things with credit cards and building up credit card debt, that is considered bad debt. All this good, bad deals is actually very little when it comes to the debt to income ratio calculation. The calculation just looks at what your monthly payments are. How much debt are you paying each month? That's the debt. Good, bad, ugly, whatever. That's what we're looking at. For your income, you got to be aware that it doesn't include all types of income. Things that even I say are income don't always make it into the debt to income ratio. So not all your passive income, and usually none really of your gift income. I can't think of any that is included. I'm sure there's something out there like money coming from trusts that have been set up inside of your inheritance could potentially be looked at, and that's where you're getting above my pay grade, folks. But yeah, mostly it's usually just looking. The lender wants to look at your income, usually what's on your pay stub. Ratio. When I think about ratio and seeing this picture, it just comes to mind. I wasn't planning on sharing this, but I'll say the Fibonacci sequence, which is where you start with one thing and then you add one to the one, then you add those that come together and become two, and you add two to the last thing, which was one, and then you add three to the last thing, which was two, then you add five. Anyway, so this ratio of it always growing larger and larger, I thought of when I see that shell. I also love a story about ratios, and this might help you if you don't remember your 6th grade math. Okay, that's when we usually learn about ratios. The story is about Pythagoras, who came up with ratios and Pythagorean's theorem and all that. So Pythagoras was working with sound and changing the pitch of instruments and realizing that when he cuts off 2/3, that moves it up like a fifth. And if you cut off a quarter, then it moves you just up a second or something like that in the notes of the music. He was finding that as you cut, and if you look at instruments, you see that each of them is somehow in relation to the other to create the notes. You can look into it. Great book I would recommend is called Pythagoras and the Ratios. Children's book, yes, and that's when we learn this, that the ratio is a cutting of something, or in other words, a dividing. When we look at the debt to income ratio, the thought comes, well, is it debt divided by income, or is it income divided by debt? I hope by the end of this, as I continue to walk through the equation with you, you will have a really solid understanding about this and never be confused ever again about how to calculate the DTI, also known as the debt to income ratio. But of course, first we got to beg the question, why even do all this math? Most people want to do this equation when they want to buy a house. Or should I say a house? Or should I say a house? I couldn't resist putting the dog in here and everything. I should also be honest that at some point during preparing this presentation, I accidentally typed hopes. Again, joking aside, many of us are looking at not just like the house you want to live in, but maybe even looking at increasing our passive income. Right up my topic alley, right? Increasing passive income by owning real estate, not owning a hose, but owning a house to be able to increase your income. Which leads us to this main question. How much should I get into debt to buy a rental? Or even just to buy my first home or your second home? How much should I get into debt? Well, let's do a fast calculation. So the fast calculation we're basically looking at to determine the debt to income ratio. We take the amount of debt that you have and you divide the monthly payments by your monthly gross income. And now we've arrived at what I almost had as a completely separate video. What is the difference between gross and net incomes? I hope to give you a nice visual to help keep this straight as well. So think of a fishnet. The fishnet goes through the ocean and things get through the net. Gross, on the other hand, usually we think gross and we think of the definition of gross as like, I'm disgusted by that, right? I see some gross booger is stuck on that chair right there at that bar, right? And I think that's gross. That's one definition of gross. Another definition of gross, when it comes to math, interestingly enough, at the school I teach at, there's an aide who helps in math, and this teacher's aide, the name is Mrs. Gross. I'm like, oh, that's like the perfect name for someone who is a teacher aide and helping with math, because gross in math means the total, the first thing before the net is the gross. I'll put you the little math equation here that you can see. So net is that big amount that you would often tell someone, this is how much I make. Gross is after the money has been taken out. Money, you get your pay stub, you look at it, this money went there, this money went there, this money went there, and these people got my money, and now I'm left with what's at the bottom. But you got to be careful, because you could be, for example, I'm putting money into a 401k. So the amount on my check is not my net income because I'm making a choice, I'm opting to invest. And so you kind of have to watch that as well. It's not just the end number. It could be one that's even just slightly bigger. So can we do a fast calculation? Well, let's look at it. If we're looking to see that it's debt divided by gross income, we're going to find that this number. And then when we usually tell it or report it or look at it, we turn that number into a percentage. So what am I saying? I'm saying that you've got your monthly debt, you divide it by your monthly gross income, and you state that number as a percentage. Wanted me to do that twice anyway. So a fast, possibly, example. Let's say your monthly debt payments total to $2,000 between paying for the car, paying for my mind just went blank on what I'm trying to say here. When you go shopping and you have a line of credit with the store and you make payments on that. Anyway, Payments on line of credit. Let's go with that. A credit card, you add all that together, your total monthly debt payments come to $2,000. And your monthly gross income, well, let's take just a moment here and calculate that. So let's say that you are living at that $75,000 a year that I say, and the research says, is a great point to be. That's $6,250 a month. That's the gross income. So then you look at your pay stub, it's showing $3,945. However, your 401k payment is $625 because you're putting 10% away each month, like I also recommend. And there you are left with a net income of actually being $4,570. This is just an example. All right, so we move forward with this and we say, if we have the $2,000 and we divide it by 4,570, that gives us 0.37 blah, 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 which we just kind of lump together and say is 43%. Now comes another big question with this. Is that good or is that bad? Or in other words, what is a good debt to income ratio? Lenders like to see that you have a debt to income ratio somewhere in the 30 percentile, roughly. They often like to lend for the house at only about 28%, 25 to 28% of that. I'm going to say homework time. Right. As a teacher, here I go. Homework time. Get with a lender. We can do a very quick, fast calculation by simply looking at about 25% of your gross income. In other words, divided by 4, which if your gross income was $4,570, roughly $1,142.50. It's a little on the low side, but that would give you a rough idea of how much you could afford and what is a good debt to income ratio for you. Whew. That feels good, actually. I'm kind of excited about it. Like, this lets all of us know what is included in a debt to income ratio. And I look forward to seeing you on the other side.